If you follow VR news at all, then you can't have escaped a ridiculous hype juggernaut surrounding Bonelab. It's been hailed as the system seller, the halo of VR, the future of VR. Well, it's out now, and as one of the few channels that haven't surrendered to the temptation of breaking the review embargo or drowning YouTube with frenzied, frothing clickbait, we're ready and willing to give you our honest thoughts on the game. First up, a bit of context. I'd already grown weary of the hype train around Bonelab months ago, but knowing I was reviewing it, I tried to remain as objective in my opinion as possible. I set out to review the game as a first-time player with as few preconceptions and expectations as possible. Well, here goes nothing. I think Bonelab is crap. I think it's crap for many reasons, which I'll try and go into here, but the main one is that it feels bloody awful to play. I'm not here to review a game engine, its potential, or what it might be like in a few months when the modders have taken it apart and reformed it. What we have now is a messy, janky, hugely overpriced sandbox which thinks it's far, far better than it is. Nearly every single design decision here is wrong-headed, and it all stems from the fact that interacting with the world and inhabiting it is borderline unpleasant. On the Quest at least, the engine does everything it can to convince you that you aren't playing it properly, or you're holding the controllers wrong, and that you don't get it. I really don't give a shit about spoiling the game, because it does that itself, but we won't show the game's opening out of sensitivity, so here's a trigger warning. I'm going to discuss the intro level briefly. It contains some content that might be disturbing to you. If matters around suicide or self-harm might be upsetting for you, please skip forward to the next timestamp. Still here? Okay. One of the very first things you do in Bonelab is walk up to a rope noose and physically put it around your neck. No trigger warning, no option to skip. You don't have to be a qualified psychologist to ascertain that this might be a pretty irresponsible thing to put in a first-person VR game, particularly with no establishing narrative context. I am a qualified psychologist, and I can say with some authority that it's a dick move. It doesn't contribute anything beyond giving edgelord content creators something about which to say, sick man, as they pretend high-five their anti-woke fans. Even if this doesn't bother you, the fact is that what should be a showcase tutorial level highlights everything that's turd about Bonelab. Standing naturally with your hands holding the Quest controllers makes your virtual hands look like they've had fingers broken. Using the analog sticks to move or jump makes you waggle your thumbs, and it looks ridiculous. Movement feels imprecise and unpredictable. Objects have no sensation of mass, and clipping and sticky objects abound, making melee combat a flailing chore. The holstering and inventory system feels inept and counterintuitive. It's like Stress Level Zero have compiled everything wrong with most VR games and then genericized what it found and put it all in Bonelab as a showcase of the least enjoyable elements of any given category. Just as the narrative portion of the game gets going, it stops, then dumps you into a hub, where you are forced to experience the different minigames, moddable content and subsections of the game before you move on. The flow is appalling. Imagine completing the first chapter of Half-Life 2 and then being dumped in a Garry's Mod bowling level. According to the press release, the devs don't want to handhold and want to concentrate instead on player agency. This is a terrible mistake, because the awful, rubbery feel of the game engine does not encourage experimentation or exploration. It's all a chore. Parkour is a nightmare, and yet has its own section. Puzzles are either overwrought or insultingly simple. Time and time again, the game presents you with physical interactions that would be far easier to perform in real life. VR should be about empowerment and immersion, but Boneworks is the opposite. It's a long time since a VR game has made me feel so painfully aware of the gulf between my corporeal presence and my avatar. Try climbing or grabbing something and you'll invariably end up pulling an ammo clip from your holster, which you can't just put back. Navigating the tops of ladders and other climbing points is just nasty, so on and so on. And everywhere, almost as a deliberate insult, the off-brand Valve software feel persists. From the robot versions of headcrabs, the gas-masked soldiers, the gun turrets, the buttons. It thinks it's clever and meta like Portal, but it doesn't come close to the cleverness in design, narrative or feel that Valve is capable of. Level after level of unenjoyable dross goes by, occasionally throwing in a pseudo-edgy plot point. "The future of VR," scream other channels. So why, in the name of Gordon Freeman's left bollock, do we have an on-rails minecart shooting level? Does the future of VR reveal itself before or after the Street Puncher section, which actually plays far worse than Drunkn bar fight? Am I too devoid of vision to see that the future of VR lies in endless, bland corridor gunfights against dumb, shuffling crash test dummies that constantly fall over themselves? If so, I'll stick to the past of VR. Things like Half-Life Alyx, or Superhot, or Sirento, or real VR fishing. Anything else which actually feels good to play. Don't take my word for it, though. Let the game speak for itself. Dear friends, let us present the future of VR. There isn't a single thing that Bonelab does better than, or even in many cases as well as, some other games, and most of those other games can be bought far more cheaply, and a lot of them are even free. Gunplay is okay, but combat is by and large completely unchallenging. It is challenging, however, to reload some guns without your avatar looking like they've got some sort of degenerative bone disorder or moving like a dainty princess. Melee combat is terrible and weightless. Climbing is horrible, legs, arms and bodies constantly get stuck on geometry, and the whole shebang just seems woefully inept. I'm not impressed by the engine either. Whilst it ostensibly looks better than a lot of other Quest games, the frame rate can be chuggy, and some textures literally look like they're from the original PlayStation. I can't express how ungainly the avatars look while they're doing practically anything, and how immersion breaking this is. As an example, the devs have obviously watched some YouTube video or Blu-ray extra where an ex-Navy SEAL has imparted wisdom about firearms training, whereby the trigger finger is kept against the body of the gun and only rests on the trigger when firing. The result is that in Bonelab, your trigger finger doesn't curl around the trigger itself until pressed all the way in, despite what your hand is actually doing on the controller. It looks and feels ridiculous. Nothing seems to have been thought through from the right direction. Don't get me started on the music. It veers between harping monstrously and screaming, tuneless electronic dirges. This game only scores as highly as it does because you can turn the music off. This is a howlingly empty, malformed experience. Yes, in terms of the possibilities that may present themselves with modding in the future, it's a little more promising, but the same could be said of VRChat, and that's free. It doesn't matter how scalable the worlds are, or how many avatars you can inhabit, if it all feels so dreadful to play. I've nothing but contempt for other channels that have built this up, because there are other, smaller, more original titles that are quietly perfecting VR as a game medium, and which are well worth championing. They're also a fraction of the ridiculous price being charged for this. Instead, the hype machine is in meltdown, hungry for clicks, over this unoriginal, vaguely unpleasant engine in search of a nucleus or a decent plot. As it stands, and until the community makes more of it, Bonelab is, genre by genre, outclassed by many similar games, many of which are free. Buy a few other decent games for the same price instead. Overall, 5. Boneheaded. This is Doc for 6DOF Reviews. We'd imagine that quite a few of you will have things to say about this review, so please join in lively and comradely debate in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video and are hungry for more quest-related news and reviews, please like and subscribe.